Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone, from wherever you are joining us, and welcome to our second episode this year of Action Items with Let's Talk Supply Chain. And as always, I normally go from memory for this, and I always forget something, so I have a little list this time. This episode and all episodes brought to you by NewGenArchitects, your partner in digital supply chain transformation. And you can find out more by visiting newgenarchitects.com or sending an email to hello@newgenarchitects.com. I went back and I looked at all of the YouTube videos. If you guys follow me on LinkedIn, you may have seen, I don't know if I pop up in your feeds very often, but you may have seen that I did a 12 days of Christmas, and I went back and I posted the link to all of the recordings, and doing the count, unless YouTube or, there's some bot in the background, either 20,000 of you watched the show or a couple of you watched the show multiple times, but either way, great viewership for the first year. So I really appreciate the audience. I really appreciate the engagement that you guys bring. And my goal with this show is to really get as much reach and education as possible out into the business world for supply chain, and really helping us figure out how to overcome the challenges and come up with solutions for our supply chain challenges. So thank you for contributing to that. I am going to be hosting Thoughts and Coffee on February 28th on Let's Talk Supply Chain. So make sure that you tune into that. I'm really excited about that. And that is all of the housekeeping for this morning. Let's see. We've got Audrey, Larisha, Larry, James. Gang's all here. Thank you, everyone, for joining and continuing to come again, and especially our regulars. So let's bring up today's guest, Peter Miller, and he is the Director of Operations over at Bradford Products. Thank you for joining, Peter.
Well, thanks for having me, DC. How are you today?
I am great. I made it on time. So that is what matters. I do want to get started. I want to have you up here while we kind of talk through this, because, as I mentioned, when I asked you to be on the show, everyone, I had a great lunch with Peter not too long ago. And I wish I could have just recorded that. But we will try to replay that again with a little bit more structure around what you guys know to be our action items and our takeaways. But I really want to focus the next couple of episodes, perhaps even the entire year, around where we are in the state of manufacturing. And I think that that's a really good place for us to be within supply chain, because I think it is easy, and this is just my opinion, don't know if it is true, but it is easy for manufacturers to forget that they have a supply chain also. When you talk to some people and you say, what is supply chain? Maybe you hear, oh, it's logistics or it's manufacturing, but it's all of that stuff. And manufacturers are an integral part of the supply chain, but they also have their own supply chain to manage. So Nicole, if you'll go ahead and bring up that Forbes article. So Christina Harrington shared this on LinkedIn, and I thought that it was great for what we're going to be talking about today, which is really selling the C-suite on the technology implementations and upgrades. And this is a good article because it's very short, it's very sweet, and we'll drop the link in the comments. But it talks about, obviously, as you can see from the headline, how manufacturers can make a recession work to their advantage. So we see that the research is saying that we're about 98% likely to be heading into recession right now. And it's easy to get into that, oh, we got to cut costs, cost saving. But it's also a really good time to invest back into the business. If you scroll down a little bit, Nicole, one of the things that I like, and some other readers also pointed out in the comments on Christina's post, is that the author here likens this to likens it to a sports team. So in the off season, the manufacturing industry right now, he's saying it's tired, a little beat up, and you need to regroup. So, even not even off season, but halftime, you're with the team, you're tired, your coach is kind of, getting you ready for the next half. And it's a good time to really put things into perspective. So Peter, one thing that I did notice through here, and I was like, oh, I don't know exactly how true that is, that the author does say it's downtime. But, as you and I talked about, we do talk to, we're a corporate member of the Modular Building Institute, and we talk with a lot of prefab and modular manufacturers. They're not necessarily slowing down. There's still a lot of construction, even with the earthquake that just happened. I saw an email yesterday that the government of Turkey is looking for modular manufacturers to try to get housing rebuilt and commercial infrastructure. So it's not necessarily a downtime for everybody. What have you been seeing, maybe personally at Bradford, or also just with your peers?
Yeah. So honestly, we have not seen any kind of slowdown whatsoever at this stage. Are we concerned about it? Sure. But our pipeline is still really full. Now, granted, we're a luxury item that caters to high-end clientele as well as the construction industry. So most concerning, I guess, is when we see the construction industry start to take a turn down. That's when it gets a little antsy around here. But we just haven't seen it. One other thing I want to talk about supply chain for a sec. Like our suppliers, we went through an incredibly difficult time during the pandemic, as did probably all or most manufacturers, where we couldn't get the supplies. And so that helped or prevented us from delivering product in a timely fashion. Thankfully, we're seeing the other side of that right now. But in the meantime, we did a lot of, and I suspect others did, a lot of panic buying. So your inventory levels went up. And so we're trying to work through that and bring that back down to a more normalized setting. But
okay.
Yeah.
That's a whole other topic, which I would love to get into. So maybe I'll have you back, or maybe I'll make that a topic. But I'm an inventory geek. My very first software implementation project was inventory management, and just all of the different things that go into that. So I'm definitely a geek in that perspective. I see Nicole scrolling down. So yeah, 3 ways manufacturers can invest for the future. Let's scroll down. We don't have to go through the whole article, but just those 3 points. I think one of them was introduce Industry 4.0 technologies to your operation, which is just very interesting to me. I love that the author said to introduce that because I would say maybe, was it before the pandemic? Or maybe right at the beginning, early 2020, I was seeing a lot about Industry 5.0 and like what's after Industry 4.0. And I'm like, dude, we're still like not really at, like, everyone hasn't adopted 4.0. We can't look at Apple and Coke and, HP and Lenovo and the supply chains to admire, those 20 companies every year as the majority of the industry, because that's not where we are. There are a lot of companies that are still trying to figure out how to just adopt and where to introduce technology that has existed for decades, and they haven't adopted that yet. So I love that the author says start introducing that, not even like the fancy schmancy stuff, blockchain, machine learning, just like OCR and some process automation. And then of course we've always been talking about talent. I did a podcast back in 2020, perhaps it was early 2021, with the New Jersey MEP. And shout out to them. Great team over there, doing a lot of good work for small manufacturers in the state. But we talked about talent. And, a lot of manufacturers, they're working with a lot of manufacturers that are saying, we're paying people a lot of money, why aren't they coming? And talent retention, recruitment, and culture is a lot more than just the pay. The pay is great; it's a big part of it, but it's a lot more than that. And then putting more money into innovation. So I think that this is a good Larisha, what is 4.0? What is 5.0? It is the evolution of industrial automation and technology and manufacturing. So I think this is actually a good time, Nicole. We can take down this article. Anyone can go back and take a look at it and read it. I also have it shared on my LinkedIn. But the topic here, it's great to say as an author from an outside party, yes, you should go do all these things. And what we talked about, Peter, is it's a little bit harder to say, yes, Mr., Mrs. CEO or president, we should do all of these things, because especially in a world where our pipeline is full, like we're busy, we're fine, like we're profitable. Why? So that's what we're going to be talking about. We're really going to be focusing on how to get our leaders who might not necessarily be all gung-ho and excited about the software implementations and technology upgrades, hardware also, and really talking around some tips and tricks of how to get that going within your organizations. And the first action item that we have is, I believe, considering the audience. Yes, considering the audience. So what I was thinking about here, Peter, and I would like for you to weigh in. It's really easy for us to say, from our perspective, we're dealing with and we're seeing these things happen, whether it's the shop floor, we're working with, our external partners, we're talking to them every day. The C-suite, or the person who, has the purse strings and is writing the check, doesn't necessarily feel that pain. So you have to communicate with them in a way, and just remember that they don't feel the same thing that you feel. And they're not going to make the move unless there's pain and urgency. So how can we communicate that pain and urgency, to that level of the organization that's not necessarily feeling it every day?
Right. Well, I think the first thing, like in my experience, has been that you have to understand what the ultimate goal of ownership is. Where are they really trying to get to? And depending on the size of the company and whether it's, privately owned, family owned, what have you, you've got to understand where do they want to take it. And once you get a good understanding of that, like in my case, when I first came to this company many moons ago, the owner said, well, I want to be $100 million company one day. And I said, well, that's great. And he said, but I really don't know what my cost structure is. And I really not familiar enough with, what I should be buying and when I should be buying it. And so you have to start answering those questions for these folks first. You got to get in and dig in and kind of look around. And what I did was I spent a couple of weeks and I dug into the company, and I was new. So I was meeting people and understanding what the new, what their processes were and so forth. And once I kind of had a grip a little bit on that, I went back and said, well, you have no system, right? And so they had a lot of great people, but a lot of stuff was in people's heads and it was written on paper, or there might have been a spreadsheet or two kicking around someplace. Now, granted, when I joined this company, it was small, much smaller. We've grown 83% since I've been here, but the keys, I think, are understanding what their goals are, or at least getting them to tell you what their goals are. And then you have to go find those areas within the company that there are pain points, or there is either areas where, because you don't have the technology, you don't have the data, so you really don't even know what you're doing. And you've got to then identify those areas. For example, I mentioned inventory before. When you start looking and digging into inventory, are we keeping the right amount of parts? Do we need different types of parts? Those kinds of things. Well, how are you going to get that? You're going to get that if you have a good system. You'll be able to identify and understand what your needs are. But until you do that, it's kind of I suppose there's spreadsheets all over the place. People might have spreadsheets, or they might have other ways of doing it. But until you get the technology put in place, you're never going to get there. So how do you convince them to do it? I think you've got to identify those pain points and then bring them up and bring them to their attention. There has to be obviously some sort of financial connotation to it all, so that they understand that, because usually when you talk money, that's when the boss pays attention.
Right.
And so, I would key in on those types of items as well.
Yes, that actually reminded me, and it is a good time to throw in the other link that I wanted to do a while ago. We've been here 15 minutes, a couple of minutes ago. Nicole, the SCM Dojo course. So very relevant to what Peter just mentioned, and it's also one of our action items. It will go into it a little bit more. But at this level, it has to make financial sense. You have to have a financial business case around it. And, I always tell my team, and then when we're talking to prospects, we are either going to help you make money or save money. So and that's what it has to come down to from the C-suite perspective. Even if it's something I say qualitative or touchy-feely, employee retention, or this process is just really clunky and really hard, and I hate it. I mean, employee retention and turnover has a financial cost to it. Hiring and attracting the best talent has a financial cost and can be quantified, especially when you're talking about, I want to scale and I want to become, this $100 million company. So make sure you guys check that out on scmdojo.com. There's also, I think, a supply chain digitalization bundle that includes that course as well as some other courses. And they're about an hour and a half long. It's not something that's going to take you a ton of time. And it is full of knowledge and tips and tricks. I also wrote down another note here that I cannot read. So we'll skip over that one. Maybe it'll come back to me. But Audrey, I did see the comment popped up that she said this is a challenge for her too. And I think it's a challenge for a lot of people. And one of the reasons why I wanted to talk about this is because I've had this conversation several times. It's one of the more common conversations that I do have, where, people that I've done work with before, I've received a text message before that said, I'm trying to convince my boss to keep this thing going, that we need to invest in continuous improvement, et cetera, et cetera. But the only thing I can think of is cost avoidance. And, that's head count. Like, can you help me figure out some other things and figure out the financial business case around it? So it's very important to do that. I like how you said, observe, get the data, and find the pain points. I think that there are so many times where we just see, oh, this is broken, we want to fix it, especially in supply chain. I see all the time, we're problem solvers. That's what we want to do. We just want to solve the problem. But a lot of times you have to just sit down and be quiet and observe and see what's going on and why it's happening that way now. Because many times it is a deeper cultural thing that you have to kind of think about. And I like that you also mentioned, understand what the goal is. And I know that we're talking about, from top down and us working to convince our leadership, but we also have to understand what the goals and objectives are. So there is also the responsibility of the leadership to communicate what those goals and objectives are and what that means for every person. And we've talked about this on maybe another episode. And if we haven't, I'm happy to talk about it again, of bringing people along the journey and communicating the what's in it for me. Because even if I, as a leader, want to get to that 100 million, if I don't have the team that either, one, knows that I want to do that, and two, understands how we're going to get there and what that means for them, then you're stuck. So it's a two-way street.
I wanted to touch on the people part too, because that was one of my other notes that I made is, I look at process, people, and technology, those three things. And when I think about people and I think about my own experience at this company, and I'm sure it's similar in other industry or other companies where it might be smaller, and maybe there's family, and maybe they've employed friends and they've got family members that work there. And sometimes, you have to take a hard, as leadership, you have to take a hard look and say, are those just because Aunt Sally is here, is Aunt Sally really the person that should be doing all my purchasing as I'm trying to grow my business? Does she have the skill set? Is she the right person? Or Uncle Joe or cousin Barry or whoever? I find that at some point ownership has to, or leaders have to look at that and say, okay, I love my Aunt Sally, but I don't think she's really the right person for this anymore.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of times that, in my experience, at least here, we grew from pretty much from the time I got here. There was some slow growth periods, and then we of course had the recession period during 9, 10, that area. But we've been on this trajectory, and in order to maintain that trajectory, it was evident that we had to improve our people and improve the quality of our people and the level of knowledge and understanding that they have in business or in specific areas such as, say, estimation or purchasing or those kinds of things. And so we've improved and added staff and so forth in those areas. But the people are so key, and you've got to have the right folks with the right mindset. Mm-hmm. Leadership has to recognize that, and particularly in smaller companies. And I suspect that many of the companies that are watching this or that you are looking at are probably in that small to mid range. So, this might be applicable, but it's super, super important as you look at the goals that you want to set and you want to get to that 100 million or wherever you want to get to. How do I get there? Do I have the right people? Do I have the right technology? And it's not easy, particularly like in my case where it was family owned. Where it is family owned, we have, we definitely have some family on board here, and which is great, and they're fantastic. But it's always been, sometimes in the past it was a challenge with getting the right people in the right positions.
Right, exactly. And a couple of people here are commenting that they definitely agree with that. And, people is something that the people aspect is something that we talk about, but I really like that you talked about the growth and continuing to see that trajectory. And one of the things that, we talk about, and even just internally, as me as a business owner, what gets you to 1 million is not going to be the people, process, technology that gets you to 5 and to 10 and to 20 and to 50 and et cetera, et cetera. And it's interesting to me that I feel like all of us recognize this. We know that, as business leaders. But there was an article earlier this week that I read that said the chief digital officer, the CDO, role might become, I can't think of the exact word, but extinct. It could start to phase out, because once you've established a digital strategy, then you don't need the CDO anymore. And my comment was, yeah, once we're profitable, we don't need a CFO anymore. We're not like what? And it was just a strange comment, or a strange opinion piece, because I said, I don't want to judge this person, but I'm very interested to understand how they came up with this perspective, because your people are always going to change, and their economic factors and, things that are external factors that are outside of your control. Your supplier might go out of business. You're going to need a new supplier. Maybe they have a different way of doing things. So you have to figure out, how to rework your processes, or you get new leadership and there's a new market that you want to venture into. There's so many different things in addition to growth that cause us or require us to always be vigilant and mindful, and in this mindset of continuous improvement, or plan, do, check, act, or whatever you want to call it. But it's never a one and done kind of thing. Right. So just so that we do not run out of time, what is our next action item? Please remind me. Identify the ideal end state, which is kind of loaded because, as we just said, what is the end state? It's going to be it's a moving target almost, to a sense, but you don't want it to be a moving target completely, because then you never know, like, oh, were we successful here? But if you're thinking about where you are and where you want to be, it's likely not something, I don't know how much Bradford was doing in revenue when the owner told you we want to do 100 million, but I imagine it wasn't 90 million. It wasn't 95 million. So
it was in the low tens. How about that?
yes, so that's a big transformation.
Sure.
Going from low tens to 100 million. I'm sure you weren't like, okay, boss, next year it is.
Yeah, we'll get there. Yeah, sure. Let me do this. I mean, one of the first things I came back to tell him was, well, you don't have a system, and that's why you don't know some of the things that you're asking me. And if you ever want to get to $100 million, the first thing we got to do is we got to go find some kind of system. We got to find an ERP that will help you understand your cost structure, get your financials in order in one place, and so forth. And that's what we ultimately did in 2008, was our first jump into an ERP world. Unfortunately, we didn't do a full implementation at that time due to some internal restraints that presented themselves at the very last minute. So our financial system continued to operate under a different realm, and we maintained all of our inventory control, labor cost tracking, purchasing, and other types of things in this ERP system. And we ran that for about 12 years, which helped us get a handle on what our costs were, and it helped us to understand what it took to manufacture the products that we make. But what it didn't do is it didn't intermix with the financial side of the systems that we were running here. So there was always kind of this: are we really doing that well, or are we doing? It just didn't work. So
Right.
ultimately, and I don't know where
That's
I'm.
where that continuous improvement came in.
Well, yeah, and that's exactly what, you talk about what, you really have to know what you're trying to accomplish. And go back to those goals. We talk about, if you don't know what the goal is, you really don't know what you're aspiring to be one day, right? And so I think that identifying that, that end state is to, okay, well, if we want to get here, how do we get here? We've got to put systems in place. We've got to put good quality people in place, and importantly, we've got to refine and potentially change our process, and figure out where are those places or those instances where we can achieve better efficiency, all of those kinds of things. And fortunately for us, and for many years we ran on this old what I'll call an old kind of legacy ERP system. And in 2020, January of 22, we implemented a brand new ERP system which combines everything under one umbrella. And now we have a really good, solid foundation and understanding of all aspects of our business living in one place. So it's been huge. And we've celebrated our first year live in that system just this past January, and are now kind of in a very stable environment. And at this point now beginning to tweak and fine tune some of the system and provide our leadership with much more meaningful data.
Right. So when you
help them make better decisions.
Right. So when you identify that ideal end state, it wasn't the ideal end state of 100 million.
No.
It was the ideal end state of, okay, we're going to do this first.
Continuous improvement.
Right. Let's check that box. Let's measure success. Okay, that didn't really work out. We're going to look for something else, but always the continuous improvement. Audrey had a question. Do most companies need a CDO level person, or is management level workable to keep the implementation strategy moving forward? I have an opinion, but I have opinions about everything. What do you think, Peter?
Well, you know what? I'd like to hear what you have to say first, but go ahead. You take it, and I'll think about it a minute.
So I don't think for when I think about most companies, I do think just statistically, small and medium businesses are most companies, those small businesses that you mentioned before. And now I don't think you need a CDO or a CTO, at least not as a full-time role. I think that you can very much, maybe there's a board, maybe there's an advisor to leadership that does have some understanding of digital strategy and technology. But to say that, a small business should go spend the money to have a CDO or a CTO, I don't think it's always necessary. Of course, it depends is the typical answer. All businesses are not created equal. But to even say most companies need a CDO level person, I would say the answer is a kind of easy no. And yes, there are ways for management to, I think, be digitally conscious and technologically aware of what is out there, and lean on consultants or advisors to come in and do a couple of projects or some assessments and provide, some road mapping ideas. But if within your culture, that you want to become a digital or, a data-driven culture, a technology-driven culture, whatever that looks like, then you don't need that full-time role as a CDO or CTO.
No, I would agree. I would agree with that. I don't think you do. And like in my case, in my experience, in a small business, let's face it, you wear many hats, right?
Yes. You're the CDO, Peter.
Yeah, I was. I mean, I implemented in 2008, and I implemented again in late 21, early 22. So yeah, I'm that guy. But I think, and it's not easy because we all have our regular day-to-day jobs to do, and we all have the things that we need to focus on. But in our case, we found, I led that charge, but what I did is I pulled together internally a really strong team. I was fortunate that I was able to draw on some 5 really great people who each represented a different piece of our business to kind of be that change champion, if you will, when we did our last ERP implementation. And so the 6 of us kind of collectively pulled the whole thing together. And I think I'm sorry, I don't recall the gal's name that posted the question, but you don't need a specific CDO. You need to be able to dedicate, and your leadership has to allow you to dedicate the resources within your organization to carry out whatever initiative it is that you're trying to accomplish. And that's how it worked for us. And we were successful, but it was only successful because I was able to tap some good resources here. And, they don't have to be they don't have to be the smartest people in the world. They have to be dedicated. Mm-hmm. And if they work hard and are passionate about the cause, that's half the battle right there.
Right. I like that you mentioned the committee and having like a tiny little army, because when we're talking about people, you do have to have buy-in. So, it's easier. I would imagine it's easier to sell it to the C-suite when you say, hey, the director or manager, or like this very important person in every single department, we all agree. We are all coming together to say, this is what we need to do as a business. We know what your goal is. And as a digital committee, we've decided that this is going to be the best way to start. Power in numbers. What's I think number 3 and number 4, we've already kind of touched up on number 4. Let's just go ahead and throw up 3 and 4 since we're running up on time. So quantifying the risk, and then quantifying the benefits of taking action. And this is where I was going when I was thinking about, that particular thing. We talked about building the business case. We talked about the financial numbers. And I think there are 2 sides of that coin. One of them is this is what can happen from a financial perspective if you do nothing. If you just keep doing what you continue to do, if you take no action, this is how we can quantify that. On the other side of it, it is if we do take action, this is what we stand to gain from that investment. And it's hard when you're saying, or I imagine it's hard. It's hard when you're saying, hey, we want to spend this money to make money in potentially a how do I phrase this? A world or realm or perspective that leadership hasn't thought of before. You have to invest in raw material to make stuff. You know what I mean? Like that's a set thing. But when you're talking to a someone who is not as digitally educated and doesn't really know what the tools do, the visibility that they'll provide, the data you'll be able to extract, the actionable insights you'll be able to get from these systems, and even just reduction in time for processes and reducing manual errors or things like that. When leadership doesn't just know off the top of their head, yes, we should do this. Thank you for taking the charge on. I've always wanted to do this, but I never had the right person. Peter, I'm so glad I hired you. We're not talking about those types of conversations. We're talking about conversations with leaders that we're trying to say, hey, look, this does this, and this is why we need it. So or if you did you do a quantifying, hey, what happens if we do nothing? Or was that as easy as saying you're not going to get to 100 million?
Well, it was pretty much as easy as that, but it was also that there was so much without moving to the next level ERP that we went to. We were stuck in just like this sort of cycle, right? Things were, in terms of the internal operational processes and so forth, things were not changing, and it was difficult because the financials and all of our manufacturing functions were not living under the same umbrella. It became just more and more cumbersome, and by the mere fact that we've grown a lot, and our clientele is much more sophisticated. And so without having the right kind of systems available to be able to give the right kind of responses to, say, our clients or our vendors or even our leadership team, to say, hey, this is what's happening in this area. And because we have this data, we know this, where before we never knew that, so we can make informed decisions. That really is so key. I had made another note and I'm looking for it right now. But really, it really came down to for us to, if we don't do these things, we're going to still stay in this cycle of confusion and not moving forward.
Right.
And
There are
that's
two
going to
things.
prevent us from ever getting there.
Exactly. There are two things that I took away from that. One of them was internal operations just stay the same. And what a lot of manufacturers, we actually, I think this was our second episode ever with Sneha, and we talked about firefighting and getting out of firefighting into solutioning. And because a lot of companies don't have that visibility, that data, these processes aren't standardized, everything is sitting in someone's brain, a lot of it is firefighting. It's a lot of reacting. And how do we fix that? How do we fix this? And part of, if we do these software and hardware, these technology implementations the right way, then we have gotten visibility into these processes. And we've standardized them and we've defined them and we've documented them. And it allows us to also be able to say, this is what the process should be like normally. But if this thing happens, we pull this trigger or we turn this on, and everyone kind of knows what's happening upstream and downstream, as opposed to just like, oh my God, like that didn't work out. Like, what do we do? I don't know. Call John. Like, we'll figure, you know what I mean? And that takes away from the time, energy, mental capacity that your resources have to be thinking about those strategic things. The other thing that you mentioned was customer expectations and, thinking about the voice of the customer. If you grow, the customer, then the clientele that you have at one size is not the same clientele that you're going to have at another size. We hope, of course, to continue to bring along, the customers that we have. But, I spoke with a 3PL owner earlier this week, and he's ready to grow and get more capacity. And that means bringing on larger accounts. They're going to be do larger volume. So he has to have different systems and processes to support those types of customers. Those two things stood out to me as being very important, to make sure that as we're selling to the C-suite, we're also bringing it back around to like, hey, customers will change. The way we do business will change. Who we are will change, and expectations will be different once we are a 50 million company versus a 5 million, 100 or 100 million versus a 70 million. Those expectations from the market are going to be different. So how do we make sure that we're living up to those? So I saw you writing some notes.
Well, I was just thinking about, one of the other areas that we talk about, how do you sell it to them? Honestly, and we've touched on a lot of it, but it's looking at improved process, and by those improved processes, what does that allow me to do? Does it allow me to take resources from one place maybe, and I can shift resources internally where I know I need more help over in this department, or maybe, and this was not a goal of ours, was to eliminate positions, but we were looking at a lot of the old process and we're going, why are we doing that? This new system will really kind of address a lot of that. So now I don't need Sally Sue over here or Johnny to do this particular function anymore. And as it turned out, I had somebody retiring, and I was like, well, I don't need to replace.
You don't need to refill that.
I don't need to replace it, And so those are the other benefits that you get. And it's part of the sales proposition to ownership to say, hey, we improve process. We can potentially, if necessary, reallocate some of the resources, or maybe you get to eliminate some of them. Not that was a goal, but that can happen.
Right. And I like that you talk about shifting and that reorganization of just the organizational structure. And I think that a lot of people, I don't want to say necessarily underestimate, but it's not an elimination. The goal is not necessarily to eliminate, especially if you have a culture of, we want to bring you along this journey with us. If you're open to learn, if you're willing to roll up your sleeves and be part of this growth trajectory, come along. And sometimes that means, okay, what professional development do we need to provide to, someone who's not retiring, but they've been on the shop floor, they're great, they're really smart, and now they're going to have 15 hours of their week freed up. What can we get them to do? Because another thing specifically with the software and the technology, and I always ask people this, when we get on the phone, what's your support and maintenance plan? Is your idea to reskill or upskill someone that's going to have some free time? Are you thinking that you're just always going to depend on the software vendor and like call them for support, and hopefully they have onshore support that's able to get back to you within, a certain amount of time, where they're SLAs? There are some companies that will charge you for every single hour of support that they provide for you. So what's your plan? And just asking that, a lot of people will think, oh, I didn't think about that. Because I mentioned this as building the business case course that I did, was selling the C-suite is also, if you have good leadership, they're thinking total cost of ownership. They're not just thinking what's the implementation fee, or what is the annual licensing fee, but what is the I have to train this person fee? What is the I might lose this person, cost? What is the I need to hire more technical resources who tend to be more expensive, cost? So just thinking about what that ongoing plan looks like and being able to communicate that. We talked about getting small wins and making sure that those are successful. Your small win is not going to be successful if you tell the boss it's going to cost X number of dollars and be X number of months. And then like the boss is still paying for this 3 years down the line. They're not going to want to do anything else. You know what I
Right.
mean? So, especially, you have to be so aware and mindful of every single aspect when you're doing these small wins to make sure that each one is successful, because that's how you build up to the big ERP change. That's how you build up to the let's bolt on this tool and let's, integrate with this system. And now we're ready to be that $100 million company. If you muck it up once, then, that's it.
You're exactly right. Exactly right.
All righty, we are at time. We've got 3
Oh,
seconds. I see the countdown.
wow.
Mark your calendars. Next show is March 10th, February 10th, March 10th. Sometimes it works out to where it's the same numbers, easy to remember. Audrey, thanks for your questions. Thanks everyone for joining. Peter, thank you for your insight and your wisdom. It was a great show. I knew it would be a great show. I'm so excited you were available.
I'm really happy you asked me to be here. Thanks for having me.
Thank you. All right, guys, we will see you next month.
All right.